Also want to acknowledge our university and community sponsors, the University of Iowa's International Programs, the University of Iowa's Honors Program, the University of Iowa's Public Policy Center, and the Stanley UI Foundation Support Organization for their financial support. And I thank today's special financial sponsors, Karen and Wallace Chapel. It is my pleasure to introduce Hugh Ferrer from the International Writing Program, who will now introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Sandra. On behalf of the IWP, it's great to be back to celebrate the long partnership we've had with ICFRC, and it's great to see so many friends in the room. So good to be here. As Sandra said, Ubah is a novelist, performer, teacher, and social activist. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her background to help contextualize the talk she's going to give today. She was born in Verona and raised from the age of 3 in Mogadishu until in 1991, following the outbreak of civil war, the family had to leave Somalia, returning eventually to Italy. In 1997, she moved to Rome, where she earned a Master's of Arts in Italian Literature from Sapienza University. She then worked as a cultural mediator and teacher of Italian as a second language at a number of primary and secondary schools, while also carrying out a series of interviews with migrant women as part of a project sponsored by the Department of Linguistics at Roma Tre University. The experience of collecting these oral stories in Italian, as recounted by migrant women, particularly of the Somali diaspora, influenced her deeply, stimulating reflections on the role of translation in the processes of recollection and storytelling. And that's something we're going to hear more about today. Her earliest literary works had the good luck to coincide with the birth of an online literary magazine, El Gibil, in 2003, one of the first periodicals in Italian to focus on migrant literature, so-called. Her first story, Inside, the original is Interamente, appeared there in December 2003. Since then, her fiction and poetry have been published in numerous magazines and anthologized, and she has published 2 novels, Madre, piccola, which is available from Indiana University Press in English as Little Mother, and the more recent Il Comandante del fiume, which we would transliterate as The Commander of the River, which I think is 2016, both of which tell stories of the Somali Civil War and its refugees in Italy. In 2006, she was awarded the Lingua Madre National Literary Prize, and in 2008, the Vittorini Prize. She has a PhD in African Studies from the University of Naples, and she currently lives in Brussels. We're all looking forward to your talk, Ubah. Please welcome Ubah Cristina Ali Farah.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm going to talk about how to write about violence, because a few years ago, when my last novel was published, I was discussing with my editor, and she told me something that I hadn't realized at the time. She said, because I didn't want to address violence directly, because I had this feeling of shame. There is always this feeling of shame around violence, and so this is why I started to reflect and to think about it. And so the title of my reading today will be "To Live in the Afternoon: Inheriting the Language of the Civil War," with a question mark. Several years ago, while I was working on a project about memory with a group of Somali refugees attending the Italian language school in Rome, I was asked to participate in the Dizionario segment of the Italian radio program Fahrenheit. Each week, an author was asked to choose a word per day for 5 days, following a personal criterion and with complete freedom. Given that we often ended up discussing the difficulty of translating words and concepts between the Somali and the Italian languages, Fahrenheit's proposal seemed full of possibility. This is the website of the school where I was working at the time. When I suggested the project to the young people and their instructors, they welcomed it enthusiastically. We had some informal meetings in which every stimulus arose from a word, and to some extent from the impossibility of translating it. We found terms that came close to this impossibility and that often took us places that we hadn't expected. The outcome was then a story of the many associations stemming from a single word. One of the words we discussed was the verb to leave, partire in Italian. There is a very popular lullaby in Somali which a woman sang. The lullaby goes like this. Hobey, hobeya, hobeya, hobey, hobeya. Melaga arabay, hayo halo, melaga arabay. Hayo hawalan, hayo hawal, hayo hawalan. And the word I found very intriguing was arabe. It means to live in the afternoon. You live in the afternoon only in the case of serious calamity, when you are forced to, because living in the afternoon, in the middle of the day, means leaving many things unfinished. It was very moving to hear the students' stories about the moment they decided to leave. It was something that I continued to think about through the years, like an obsession. They call this obsession boofis, from the verb boof in Somali, which means to blow up. People feel they are possessed, hunted by spirits. Almost no one spoke of a single cause, as if deciding to separate from their home was like admitting defeat. Living is always something abrupt. One of the young men who attended the Italian course was named Farhan. His story was perhaps the one that hit us the most because of its repeated departures. His was a pilgrimage from one country to another, first to Yemen, then South Africa, and eventually Italy. Between these destinations, he always returned home. It was as though his living has been always limited by the desire to return. The first time he left in the afternoon. He was only 15 years old, and he left his city, Beledweyne, in order to save himself from the conflict. He ran and ran for 60 kilometers, he said. He ran for 23 hours in a row, just less than an entire day. Then he waited. Some days later, the war reached him, even in the town where he had taken refuge. To save himself, he jumped into the river and crossed to the other side. Several people followed him, but they didn't make it, and instead were trapped in the river. The main reason for living almost like an exorcism was mentioned only occasionally. It was the civil war, the Galkosokei in Somalia. In the novel Links, authored by Nureddin Farah, which is a very well-known Somali writer, two characters called Aflawe and Jeble discuss the significance of this expression. In a civil war, death is an intimate, Aflawe said. You are killed by a person with whom you have shared intimacies and who kill you, believing that he will benefit from your death. And when you think seriously about an entire country going up in civil war flames, then you'll agree that intimacy is more complicated. Do you know the Somali term for civil war? Dagal Kasokeye. In his mind, Jeble couldn't decide how to render the Somali expression in English. In the end, he preferred the notion of killing an intimate to warring against an intimate. Maybe the latter described better what was happening in Somalia. This idea of intimacy inherent in violence is very striking for me. Maybe this was another reason for their shame, for the reason why the students rarely use this expression. They didn't say civil war, but rather burbur, which means shattering. They would say, while I was in the middle of the shattering, I decided to enter the journey. And here you have some words that I was mentioning before: Arabe, to live in the afternoon, Bufis, blow up, and the civil war. That's a clear example of how disaster reveals the limits of language. Or in other words, As the writer Gillian Slovo says, language is inadequate to represent such experiences that were so awful they seem to defy normal understanding. Is the language capable of rebuilding a world broken by violence? One of the main challenges that one encounters as a writer is the difficulty of sharing traumatic experiences. And here I have. As James Dawes put it in his book, That the World May Know, there is a contradiction between our impulse to heed trauma's cry for representations and our instinct to protect it from representation, from invasive staring, simplification, dissection. And here, this is a picture of the town where I grew up, Mogadishu. At the beginning, you have seen the cathedral, the cathedral that was built by the Italians, and there was a very similar cathedral in Cefalù in Sicily, and the cathedral was looked like that in Mogadishu when I lived there, and you can see that mosques and the cathedrals were very close to each other. So. When I left my home in Mogadishu in January 1991, my son had only been born a few days. I sat him down on one of those pillows for newborns and wrapped myself in a very long black veil. For a moment, I thought I would never be back, and so I took my last diary. One of the notebooks I had been writing in with so much dedication over countless years. A few hours later, the house was torn and ransacked. Pillow, veil, and diary, these three objects have for many years been symbols of that flight, of that break between life before and life after the conflict. They were the guardians of a writing practice that was then interrupted for many years, 7 I think, until the journey, perhaps the most important journey in my whole life, to Zeist in the Utrecht region in the Netherlands. I had not seen my father for 5 years since he had moved to Holland. Communication was late and stop and start. At times we spoke every day. At times our silence lasted for months. I remember the journey. I had saved up the money for it. It seemed extraordinary to me. I had not taken a plane for a long time. The flight was scheduled for the early morning. I think it was March or April, because my son's school was still closed for the Easter break. I got dressed, I dressed my sleeping son, and lastly, I took my contact lenses to put them in. I was anxious and hurried, and I dropped the left lens as I was putting it in, and I couldn't find it anymore. At that point, I could easily have put my glasses on, or at least put them in my pocket to use them only when I really needed to. But for some strange reason, perhaps just vanity, I decided instead to leave the house wearing only one contact lens. So my first impact with the diaspora was marked by this veiled perception, neat and clear on one side, hazy on the other. Short-sightedness is this, a veil between you and the outside world. The veil clouds your gaze, but at the same time, your naked eye is capable of seeing the smallest details if they come close to you. The French feminist poet, the French feminist writer, poet, playwright, and philosopher Hélène Cixous, in her essay Veils, describes this very feeling of proximity and distance in this way. And this is the cover of her book, Veils. Not to see is the fact, penury, thirst, but not to see oneself seen is virginity, strength, independence. Not seeing, she could not see herself seen. That's what had given her the blind woman's lightness, the great liberty of self-effacement. Never had she been thrown into the war of faces. She lived in the above without images, where big indistinct clouds roll. This is a quotation from this book that I love. Do time and distance allow us to better understand how the past matters for the present? I can say that the trip to Zeist was like my homecoming to a moving home, my guri. After that, I regained the capability to write. I choose the diaspora as the terrain of my writing, and the diaspora characters carry inside them this break, a gap between before and after, a frontier, enclosing something very precious, a secret, a detail, a root. And the first novel I wrote, Little Mother, in Italian the title is Madre piccola, and whereas Little Mother is normal in English, Madre piccola is the opposite. We would say piccola madre, because in Somali there is this beautiful word that is habarir. It means maternal aunt, and she's the one who takes care of the children of the mother. So. I use this word for this reason. The first novel I wrote, Little Mother, in its original form, was a collection of stories whose characters were people from my generation. Rereading them, I suddenly realized that in each story there was a kind of split. Their lives were divided in half, as it were, by a traumatic event, the Civil War. It is not a coincidence that the central chapter of the novel, the interlude, is set in January 1991. This was the first part of the story that I wrote, and I hardly needed to change it. As they pass through the Civil War, each character experiences something that changes their future. In the novel, there are 3 narrating voices that resurface 3 times. Each one relates her or his story to an interlocutor, once outside of each one's personal cultural context, once within it. Through the fabric of these interlocking voices, one time close, the next distant, I tried to tell the story of the diaspora. The question I asked myself was, how do individuals who have lost all their points of reference put down roots again, start a new life? Or to quote again Noureddin Farah in his non-fiction book, Yesterday, Tomorrow, Voices from the Somali Diaspora, based on conversation with Somali refugees. He says, still I must ask what becomes of a man or a woman if no moth taps at the window to the universe of his or her creativity. So it's a beautiful image, I think. The thinking about creating a new world in the books and mingling all these experiences and memories together to save yourself and to save a country or an idea that you had about a community. The characters look for the answer in relationships. It is through them that we regain our sense of self and our way of being in the world, our most genuine identity. But what sources or resources were crucial to me? The first, in order of time, were private and especially telephone conversations. In the early years, when I didn't even have a cordless phone, I spent hours glued to the telephone, sitting at a table. Partly for fun, partly to keep focused, I started to write down the stories I heard. They seemed exceptional to me, not because they really were, but because they sounded so ordinary. I mean, we didn't tell each other important things, but we talked about what we were doing at that particular moment, small details that on the surface were insignificant, but had the power to obliterate the time and the miles that separated us. We never spoke about the Civil War explicitly. Fragments or details about it will emerge occasionally and unexpectedly, as if resisting coherent and chronological representation. Many of the stories I heard ended up in my writing. First and foremost, what mattered to me was to underline how people who lived through terrible experiences exist in more than one dimension and should not have their lives reduced to the category of victims or survivors. Other important sources were 3 Somali prestigious poems, especially the poem in Somali is Hamar wal Wuhumeye. Hamar is the Somali word for Mogadishu. We call the city Hamar. Authored by Ahmed Naji, who is a Somali poet, which I rewrote in the interlude. I did not translate it literally, but I rewrote it in this way. Hamar wal Wuhumeye. Sorry. Hammer walugu xumeeye. Hammer, they have ruined you. Who will pay for the sins committed? City of mine, city where they buried my umbilical cord, city where everyone lived in peace and harmony, in safety and freedom. Magnificent coastal city on the African side. There my brothers, my parents, and cousins all lived. But because of the blood and strife, these same brothers are fighting among themselves. Hammer walugu xumeeye. Hammer, they have defiled you, filled you with bullets, destroyed and burned you, destroyed your neighborhoods, sacked your treasures. The respected families fled across the borders. These just and honest people liberated the country from criminals and from foreigners. Today, all of them lie buried. Nobody cares anymore about the wisdom of the elders. Hammer walugu xumeeye. Mogadishu, they have betrayed you. This is the song of Ahmed Naj. The song was enormously popular among Somalis, Hammer being represented as a woman who was raped. You can't see it in my translation because I tried to change a little bit the verses. But in this poem, as Professor Captains pointed out, the author evokes, rather than describing in detail what happened in Mogadishu in 1991. All the poems analyzed by Professor Captains in her book, Clan Cleansing in Somalia, mediate the violence of state collapse by unambiguously harnessing their work's emotive power to delegitimize the political construct of clan. However, what is striking is that they make no direct mention of specific clan names or episodes and incidents committed by and against people identified by specific clan names. The reason of this silence are specifically addressed in her book and could also be related to the inability or unwillingness to speak about violence that occurred during the Civil War, expressed by the Somali refugees I have mentioned at the beginning of my reading. Captains proposed her book as a mediation of violence because if one projects ethnic or clan identities and hatreds that resulted from violence and critically back into time, these may distort the past and make mutual hatred and distrust appear even more intractable and irreconcilable than they are. Little Mother is about first-generation refugees who are still dealing with the fallout of the Civil War in their own lives and in their relationship with other Somali refugees and immigrants. However, the novel ends with the birth of a new baby whose name is Tariq, which means history in Somali. This is the cover of my second novel. I think that ideally, as a sequel to the first novel, the second one, Il Comandante del Fiume, the commander of the river, is about this very generation of Somali kids born after the Civil War. The protagonist of the story is called Yabar and is an 18-year-old boy born in Somalia but raised in Rome. The what interested me was to trace the mental process through which one's personal identity is formed, the cultural points of reference of the imagination, the way of experiencing relationships. It is a process of initiation in which the young man questions power and authority, in which his mythical origins dialogue with the surrounding reality, the environment in which he is being raised. He grew up in Rome, but his parents are Somalis. A major feature in his life is the absence of his father, whom Yabar has never met and of whose whereabouts he has no idea. His father walked out years ago, and Yabar keeps a photo of him, fragments put back together with the hideous, unrecognizable outlines of the man. The title of The Commander of the River is inspired by a Somali legend about the creation of two rivers, the Juba and the Webishebele, which are the two main waterways in Somalia. The legend is revealed piece by piece throughout the book, as it is told to Jaber, the young protagonist. He is 18, as I said, at the time, and finds himself is hospitalized, having suffered an injury, the origins of which are not disclosed to the reader. From a tender age, Jaber listened to his mother telling this tale, in the process learning that in order to know good, you have to live alongside necessary evil. Mingling together memories and mythological tales, I wanted to investigate how the historical experience of one generation is received as childhood mythology in the next. In the post-generation, as Eva Hoffman says, the mythology can come to include a world divided into two opposing forces, the force of evil and of idealized victimhood, of persecutor and persecuted. The idea of post-memory describes the relationship of the second generation to powerful, often traumatic experiences that preceded their birth, but they were nevertheless transmitted to them so deeply as to seem to constitute memories in their own right. Post-memory is not identical to memory, it is post, but at the same time it approximates memory in its affective force. Hoffman describes what was passed down to her. Rather, I took in that first information as a sort of fairy tale, deriving not so much from another word as from the center of the cosmos. An enigmatic but real fairy tale. The memories, not memories, but emanation of wartime experiences, kept erupting in flashes of imagery, in abrupt but broken refrains. These not memories, communicated in flashes of imagery and broken refrains, transmitted through the language of the body, are precisely the stuff of post-memory. I'd like to conclude with the very beginning. With the last word the students of the Asinitas and I choose. The word was casa. In Italian, we only have a word to say house or home. In English, house and home are not the same thing. Home is intimacy, the dwelling, the soul's place. There is a similar difference between guri and dar in Somali, although with other nuances. There is a beautiful expression in Somali which is need al-wudisa. That means they encourage you, they motivate you. Literally, they build your soul. They build your soul. I love this expression, to build the soul. It may be that the relationships that helps us lay the foundation to build the soul, protection and solace at the same time. So we can always carry our home with us. Our home can travel. I'm the one who goes away, writes the poet Sunjata Bhatt. I'm the one who always goes away with my home, which can only stay inside, in my blood, my home, which does not fit with any geography. This is the end of the... Yeah, I also had a very short poem that I wanted to read in Italian and I had this translation here just to hear my voice, with my mother tongue, but perhaps it's too long. I will read only, it takes 3 minutes. Is it okay? Oh. Yeah? Okay. Because I think that is particularly in this circumstances very powerful for me to read this poem, because it was the first thing that I wrote after the trip to Zeist that I was telling you about at the beginning. So the title is Rosso, and I had this image for many years, and then I was able to write this poem. It was more than 20 years ago, I think. Alba spumosa. Ci sorprendesti offuscati e soli, mentre andavamo per sempre. Io sulla camionetta sudicia e un involucro prezioso tra le braccia. Fissavo attonita i fucili appoggiati sulle spalle. Guerriglieri accompagnavano il nostro addio e la sabbia ricopriva tutto. Tra le dune scivolose e rari capanne uscivano gridando i bambini e le donne tendevano il braccio. Aspetta, questo è l'estremo saluto. Ancora l'angoscia non ha invaso i loro volti. Ne percepisco il sentore. Ora mi accorgo di avere le labbra salate. Ma il cielo è terso, limpido, ceruleo. Fuggo dalla morte e la porto con me. Se non fosse per il viso sereno dei fanciulli. Lontano si delinea l'oceano e vedo, ferruginosa e pesante, un'ottusa nave da guerra. Un guerrigliero alza il mantello rosso al vento, l'altro afferra due lembi. Ondeggia fluttuante come pesce marino il mantello rosso e si alza dall'ottusa nave da guerra una libellula d'acciaio. Mio padre dice: l'elicottero sarà qui tra poco, corri. Ma le mie gambe si muovono a stento. Da poche ore, tenera creatura è sorta dal mio ventre. Ora stringo al petto il prezioso involucro. La libellula si alza, mio padre gesticola frenetico, ma non sento la sua voce. E mi giro. Vedo il guerrigliero con il mantello rosso, è molto giovane come me, forse ha 18 anni. E nasconde il torace con il mantello rosso. Sorride. Ora tornerà a prendere anche te, mi dice. E tu non vieni. La sua testa ondeggia come il mantello rosso e tiene il fucile a tracolla. Ma il sorriso è candido, aperto, innocuo. Nella libellula, circondata da pareti d'acciaio, osservo per l'ultima volta e vedo un lungo cordone di guerriglieri circondare la spiaggia. Poi al centro un mantello rosso che fluttua, si contorce, si allarga. Thank you.
When you left Somalia after civil war began, why didn't your father go to Europe with you?
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, he actually all the people who were able, all the people that were able to leave the country. My father was with me at that moment, but yeah, the city was very dangerous. So we couldn't find each other, and for sometimes, and we were able to be together. So my father was with me at that moment. Yeah, yeah. But it was really amazing because after the Civil War, everyone had his own story about what happened, and it was very powerful because, and we sometimes we still talk about it, what happened in that very moment. And but yeah, what I wanted to say something about it because my father, it's not a coincidence that I'm half Somali, half Italian. My father went to Italy to study when he was, and he met my mother at the university in the 70s. And somehow Somalis, when they left the country, when they left Somalia, some of them went to Italy because they thought that Italy would welcome them, and this didn't happen. So it was somehow as losing the country again for Somalis because there was this long relationship with Italians, and so they felt betrayed twice somehow. Yeah.
Please describe the current political realities in Mogadishu.
It's complicated. Yeah. No, I mean, I went back to Somalia last year after 25 years, and but I wasn't able to go to Mogadishu. It is possible to go there, but yeah, apparently it's a little bit dangerous. And it is not a coincidence. I went to Somalia because I was invited to a book fair in the north of the country. I grew up in Mogadishu, but I had never been to the north of the country where my father is from. And what happened is that after the Civil War, I think that people found very difficult to talk with each other, and there is many things that were not discussed in public, and so many of them decided just to be separated and to go back to where they were from. So I've never been to Puntland, my country, my city, my town is Mogadishu, but I couldn't go there, and yeah, because there is this kind of federalism, and there are different states. It's in Somalia now, and and everyone goes in where he's from. I mean, his parents were from.
As a follow-up question to that, can you say a little more about not naming the clans?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult to explain this, because as I was saying, what we call prestigious poems is interdicted, is a kind of a taboo, because Somalis, they all have one religion, they are Muslims, and they speak one language. The language, Somalia is a very big country, and they, after independence, they were very proud to be the only country where they could talk to each other, even though it was colonized by the British, the French, and so it was actually the flag, the stars represent the 5 territories that were divided among the British, French, Ethiopians, and Kenyans. So somehow the clan is like somehow like not a surname, but it's your lineage, your how can I say that? Patrilineage, and it was used to help in a nomadic society, to help each other when there was a calamity, something happened, and so on. But of course, during the colonialism, it was used to divide people, and also during the Siad Barre regime, it was used to punish people, and because of the behavior of one person, the whole clan would be punished for it, and so this made things become more and more difficult. But it doesn't have any kind of relation. It is not an ethnicity. What I wanted to say, it's
Have you been able to visit the large Somali community in Minneapolis?
No, but I'm looking forward to, because I was lucky enough that I'm working with a translator here that she's studying here, and she's from Minneapolis, and so we are going together in the 21st of October. That actually, to have different contacts with the Somali community, and I'm really looking forward to be there. Yeah.
Does the topic you wish to write about affect the language you choose to use when writing? When do you write in one language over another?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. When I went to Somalia, so Somali language was written in 72. So it has a very, very, very powerful oral tradition, poetry tradition. Poetry is considered very important for Somalis. But it was not officially. I mean, it was written sometimes with Arabic characters and scripts, but officially it was written in the 72. And after the revolution, I mean, in the 72, all Somali was introduced in the education in the schools. And all that generation of the generation of my father were very proud of this kind of experiment, introducing the language and studying in their own language, because they couldn't communicate bureaucratically, because the Somalis of the north write in English, and the Somali of the Italian colony would write in. So I went to the Somali school until I was 9. Then the political situation became more and more difficult, and so even though my father didn't want he wanted me to be with the Somali community, to stay with Somali, I went to an Italian school. So my formal education has been in Italian, and but when I moved to Italy, at the beginning, I felt so homesick because everyone was leaving Italy. There were no Somalis anymore, or only few people decided to remain. And so what I did was, I started studying the poetry and all these things. So it's ironic in a way that while I was in Somalia, I would study in Italian books, and then when I moved, I started studying Somali text, and So, but I write in Italian to answer the question because my formal education has been in Italian, and even though I try to change the language, to deconstruct a little bit this idea of the Italians introducing Somali words, introducing the rhythm of Somali songs, or of also the melody of the language somehow. Yeah.
I actually have one last question. This question's from me, because when we first met and we started chatting, and hopefully I pronounce your name correctly, so Ubah Cristina Ali Farah. You mentioned that you wanted to explain the length of your name, and you want to share that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So, the reason is that, so I was born in Verona. My mother was 20 at the time. She was very young, and she came from her background was a working class family, so she hadn't had the opportunity to travel a lot, and so you see she just met my father and fall in love with him, even if they were so different culturally somehow, and but she didn't know that she didn't realize that Cristina was a Christian name, and Somalia was a Muslim country. So she called me Cristina, and my father didn't care. She said, "What? Call her as you like." And when we moved to Somalia, so this name was not only a Christian name, but was very difficult to pronounce, because in Somalia you don't have all these consonants, Cristina. So everybody was like, "Oh my God, what a name!" So, so I was so ashamed, and I remember that my grandmother traveled from the north to meet me at the time, and so I said, I'm so ashamed of this name. Nobody is able to pronounce it, and she gave me this name, Ubah, that means flowers, because apparently she said that I was in love with flowers, and Ubah.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation, and the poem reading was gorgeous. Thank you. Thank you so much. We now, we do now conclude our program. I want to give a big thank you to Ubah Cristina Ali Farah for her presentation. I also want to thank our sponsors, the University of Iowa's International Programs, the University of Iowa's Honors Program, the University of Iowa Center for Public Policy, and the Stanley UI Foundation Support Organization for their generous support. And we also thank today's special financial sponsors, Karen and Wallace Chapel, and the International Writing Program. And we thank City Channel 4 for making our programs available to viewing audiences. Ubah, as a small token of our appreciation, I would like to present you with the coveted Iowa City Foreign Relations Council mug. Thank you. Thank you.